Croissant null, friends. Oh, you know what? It helps if I turn my thingy on. Can I get my T-Rex okay? No! Every time I film! No! Croissant null, friends. As you may remember in my last little trailer video, it's April, and that means it's time for some good-natured tomfoolery. Shoshi from Costume Literate started the idea of a wacky sew-along where we all made something historical in wacky fabrics, or something wacky, yet historically documentable. I chose to do the former. I've been wanting a set of late 1700s stays for a while, thanks to my friend Hex, Mariah Petty, Cat's Cradles Textiles, Sewing Frankly, and like 900 other historical costumers who make everything 18th century look amazing. I knew I wanted a set of stays that would stand on their own as a garment, but also provide the proper silhouette for other gowns I decided to layer over them in the future. When I was looking for fashion fabric, I was inspired by the single color toile fabrics and the lovely damask patterns found in the 18th century. And then I found it, the most perfect synthesis of damask pattern, toile colors, and Gothic imagery that I could have imagined. Behold the Heart and Thistle anatomical damask fabric by Piratical on Spoonflower. It does come in several other colorways, and I will put a link to their shop in the description. So without further ado, grab your cuppa. Today I am drinking a raspberry tisane from Harney & Sons, and let's get into it. The first thing I'm doing is printing out my pattern so I can tape the pieces together and cut it out. I bought the red threaded 1780s stays pattern in the recommended size for my waist, even though that size is 4 to 6 inches too big for my bust. I decided to go ahead and cut out my first mock-up from some duck canvas that I had on hand to see how it would fit me and from where I would need to shrink those inches. Friends, this is where I had an entire meltdown. Nothing about this pattern fit correctly. Everything was too big, from the bust, which I was swimming in, to the strap length, to the waist measurement. I actually printed out a pattern at 96% to see if that would help, but it made the length all wonky. I actually considered scrapping the entire thing because it fit me so badly, even for a first mock-up. I was angry because I had spent a fairly substantial amount of money on a pattern that wasn't working, with no guidance about how to make it better, and frustrated at a situation which seemed to reinforce the societal position that everything about my body was wrong. Luckily, after a good night's sleep and some encouragement from my friends, I felt more determined to make the project work. Okay, don't mind the tornado giggles in the background and my messy working space. So I have gone back to my original stage pattern, not the one I printed out at a smaller reduced percentage, because I don't think that one's going to be viable, just because it didn't feel right. The fit didn't feel right in general, not just that it was too big in the bust. So what I've done is I've gone back to my 100% printed whatchamacallit, and I've gone and shrunk them in the way that I guess they told me to, by taking out 4 inches spread out over the 3 or actually 6 panels of the stays. So I thought about, so with this one, what I did was actually just shaved off the side, but this particular measurement was so wide on me that this was basically in my armpit. So I thought it would be better to, as you can see, this is moved over because I took the excess out from here. So I'm going to try that, I think, eventually. But I don't have any more material right now for a new mock-up. I don't have any more canvas. So what I'm going to do is go back to my original mock-up pattern, and I'm just going to draw a line and basically sew in a dart along each, top edge where that dart should be along all 6 panels. And then I will try it on again and see what that looks like. After taking in each piece by 2/3 of an inch, fitting not shown, and then pinching out another inch on each side of the lacing, I finally started getting a shape that felt secure and supportive and gave me the V-front lacing that was so popular. I ended up adding back that 2 inches in front to make the front edges meet, but that would prove to be a bit of a mistake as the finished stays are just a little bit big for me. Time to start cutting out the actual fabric. I'm using a mid-weight twill for lining and interlining because I blew all of my budget on the fashion fabric and couldn't afford coutil. And I'm not sorry. I am tracing all of the pieces with my trusty friction heat erasable pens before cutting them out. Next up, my delicious heart fabric. I'm fussy cutting each piece so that I can guarantee pattern matching and placement using the little upside down heart pendants at the bottom as a seam line. The side seams are at different angles relative to the grain line, and I didn't bother trying to pattern match on those seams, but I did mirror them so that the placement of the pattern on each side piece is the same. Then, in order to transfer the seam lines and the boning channel lines, I broke out my light box. Honestly, I should have grabbed my bigger one, but this one did okay. And again, I'm using my friction pens because they will eventually iron out, but until then, they'll stay put nicely. I know this because I spilled a glass of water all over these pieces after filming, and the marker didn't disappear. After everything is cut and marked, I'm going to baste the interlining and fashion fabrics together to make sure they act as one, and then I will stitch around each piece so that the edges are fastened together as well. And then I will stay stitch around the seam lines on all of the tabs in preparation of cutting them. This is, by the way, all according to the directions, although I will deviate from them later. Front side seam sewn together on both shell fabric and lining, check. Next, we start getting into the fun actual construction bits. I sewed the fashion pieces and lining pieces together at the front seam and then pressed them very carefully to make sure I didn't erase any necessary lines. And then came the boning channels, which I sewed forever and ever and ever. After a brief tea break, it was time to cut the bones. For this set of stays, I purchased some synthetic whalebone from Burnley and Trowbridge, and it was a dream to work with. I used tin snips to cut the bones to length, which probably wasn't the best tool, but it's what I had. I used a Dremel to round off any sharp edges, and always make sure to wear your particulate masks. Okay, here is where I deviated from pattern instructions. Normally, you'd bind the fronts and backs separately and then sew them together and serge or otherwise finish the edges. Instead, I sewed the fronts and backs together, finished the edges, and then bound the whole set of stays at once. This will make them more difficult to alter later, but it makes the smoothest finish. It was a pain in the butt to sew the boned pieces together before pressing them, but I wanted to make sure I sewed along the marked seam lines before ironing them out. Then I pressed and seamed the stays, which helps the synthetic baleen relax and lay flatter. After that, I needed to make the bias tape. I found some linen from fabric store that matched the red's hearts perfectly. I took a piece of that to cut into bias strips 2 inches wide. Normally, I would do a different process to make the bias tape that is way quicker for longer lengths, but I didn't need that much of it, so I just cut each strip individually and sewed them together before using my handy bias tape maker to press the tape into place. Before binding the stays, I had to finish the inside seams. The instructions say to serge these, but my serger is threaded with black thread and I'm lazy. So instead, I cut all the twill seam allowances down by half and folded the fashion fabric over them and felt them down. Then I took the linen bias binding and applied it to the stays by hand. According to the instructions, it's possible to sew it on by machine, and I thought about it, but I felt like I had more control when sewing by hand. So I used a small felling stitch so that only tiny stitches are visible from the front. Once the stays are all bound, it's time to deal with the straps. Since they will be sewn on from the inside, I needed to finish the edges of the straps. I cut down the fashion layer and sewed the lining layer over the edge with a herringbone stitch. This will be hidden between the strap and the stays. After that, I used linen bias tape to bind the straps to, securing it with felling stitches. To attach the straps, I pinned them in place and used small whip stitches all around the join. Production assistant Bran reminds me that it is time for a commercial break. Stay tuned to see us finish this project. The last step of finishing the stays is marking and sewing the eyelets. The instructions call for using grommets and cross lacing, but I wanted hand-sewn eyelets and spiral lacing instead. The eyelets are 1 inch apart and 1/2 inch at the beginning and end of the spiral. I used Burnley and Trowbridge silk buttonhole twist in white, and don't worry, the links are in the description. To make the eyelets, I used a metal awl to poke a hole in the fabric. I started off using the pretty wooden awl, but then I accidentally chipped the end of it. And then I whip stitched the eyelets to keep them open before going back over it with a buttonhole stitch just to be pretty. I I don't always do that, but I did this time for the aesthetic. I hope you enjoyed this April Fool's fabric video. I had so much fun making these stays, and I feel like the gothy Claire Fraser of my dreams. I didn't have enough time in this video to go over making the rest of the items for this outfit. The bum roll, the skirt, and the pockets. So stay tuned in the next video for those, which will also be part of the April Fool's fabric collab. Check out the playlist in the description for more videos like this. I will be adding to it over the course of the month. And also be sure to follow or participate in the Instagram collab, where you can show off your April Fool's fabric project, past or present, by tagging your pictures with hashtag April Fool's Fabric. I'll be showcasing those posts in my stories all month long as well. So if you like this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. I upload every other Friday, and if you like reminders, ring the notification bell. If you want to find me on other social media, I am at OpusLNI everywhere, even on TikTok. I'll put all of those links in the description below, along with the link to my Ko-fi, where I post exclusive content for donors, and where I have opened a small web shop if you'd like to help support the channel in a more direct way. Until next time, be kind, do the work, continue supporting marginalized people, and keep creating. Well, of the month, and Sue, why?